Well, hey, good morning, and I get to be the first. Merry Christmas. It's maybe a little bit early, but what does Christmas mean to you? What are your favorite Christmas traditions? One of my favorite family Christmas traditions is that my father-in-law every year buys himself a present. And then he wraps it up, and then on Christmas Day, he opens it and acts all surprised. And it's always like an awesome toy, something for everyone to play with, something you'd want if you were a kid in a toy store. What are your Christmas traditions? I'm going to have to come up with some new traditions this year. This is my first Christmas out of England, and I feel a little confused. It feels strange. Christmas should be cold. It should be damp. The day should have about 4.5 minutes of sunlight. Like I'm really confused when I walk past in the sweltering heat, and I'm kind of like down the street, and you're greeted by snowmen everywhere. That just doesn't seem to work in my head. There's a lot of confusion around at Christmas, isn't there? And there's this fantastic story of there was a country, it wasn't a big famous Christian country, but after the Second World War, had American troops stationed there, and they wanted to reach out, one of the department stores, to the American troops, so decided at Christmas we're going to do a Christmas display in our shop window, and they didn't really know much about Christmas apart from what they'd seen in films about Santa, and that it was a vaguely Christian festival, and so the centerpiece of the nativity scene ended up being a giant Father Christmas nailed to a cross. There's a lot of confusion at Christmas. What does Christmas mean to you? So somebody said that Christmas is a bit like a birthday party posted on Facebook, and half the world turned up without really knowing whose party it was. Because it's strange, isn't it? The story behind Christmas is just really odd. 2,000 years ago, a teenage girl called Mary engaged to a guy called Joseph. Before they're married, they find out she's pregnant. He says it's not his. She says, I'm a virgin. Nobody believes her. Joseph says, I'm gonna call it off, and then changes his mind because we find out that he's had a dream from God where God says, this child is from me, and he will save his people from their sins. He's Emmanuel, God with us. And so Joseph, amongst kind of lots of misunderstandings and shame, takes Mary as his wife. They, for tax reasons, they have to go to Bethlehem to register. None of his family will take him in. There's no room at the inn, and they end up in a stable amongst the animals where she gives birth. Shepherds, not shepherds from the Christmas card, shepherds, burly, kind of rugged men from the fields, say they are sent by an angel and come and worship him. Wise men from a far-off country with dubious religious practices follow a star and come and bring gifts to this child, weird gifts. One of the gifts is something for when the child dies. It's not a great gift, not so wise for a wise man, really. And then the local king hears about this baby and is worried and concerned, so slightly overreacts, sends the troops in, kills every child of the same age. Mary and Joseph have escaped. They go to Egypt and then Nazareth, where the child grows up, unknown, a carpenter in a backwater town. Think car mechanic in modern-day Basra. It's not how a story should start that kind of has a claim, that says it has a claim on every one of our lives. The Gospel of Luke, Luke starts his account with in those days. Caesar Augustus did this, but he just starts with in those days. And those three words just have so much kind of weight. In those days when Israel was supposed to be a nation, was supposed to have freedom and be a great nation, and in those days they were under foreign rule, oppressive rule, a foreign government. In those days where God's promises seemed unfulfilled. In those days when Israel was supposed to be a light to the nations, pointing people to God, the religious leaders were more divided, unhelpful, and abusive than ever. In those days, God seemed far away. In those days when Mary and Joseph are supposed to be making the best of a pretty tricky situation, they get sent 4 days' journey by a donkey across a desert to another town so that in those days Caesar Augustus could tax everybody more efficiently. In those days when their lives are being jerked around by powers beyond their control. In those days can often feel like in these days. In these days where God seems far away, where his promises seem unfulfilled, and it seems like you're not in control of your life. But the good news is that in these days, like in those days, God was doing something. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Like Mary and Joseph, they don't know that the tale will be told throughout all generations. They don't know that their lives will be captured in artwork, that the story will be told in nativity plays throughout schools all across the world, with Mary's looking pretty happy because they've got the best part, and Joseph's looking pretty stiff and rigid because they're a 14-year-old boy in a dress in front of their friends. It's like they don't know this at this stage. They don't know what this all meant. They don't know what any of this tricky stuff means. In those days, in these days, that they didn't know what Christmas meant, what it all means. We're in a season looking at John's Gospel, and people have often John's Gospel is different to the others. It's a story of Jesus' life, and it's different to the other three accounts because it's kind of more poetic, it's more grand. Some people have kind of likened it to a big stately house, a big mansion, and if that's the case, our passage for today, the opening passage, is kind of like the driveway. It's kind of like on this, John sets out his key themes. He sticks his stake in the ground and says, this is what this book is about. This is what this is about. This is how I want you to respond. This is what I want you to know. And whereas all the other gospel writers start by telling us what happened at Christmas, John starts by telling us what those happenings mean. Let's have a look at our reading together. It'll come up on the screens, but if you've got a Bible, you might want to turn to it. This is John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. John chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not understood it. There came a man who was sent from God. His name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to testify to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who received him, to those who believed, he gave the right to become children of God. Children not born of natural descent, nor of human decision, nor husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling amongst us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testifies concerning him. He cries out saying, "This is he of whom I said, he who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me. From the fullness of his grace we have received one blessing after another. For the truth, for the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but God, the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known." John wants us in these days to know what God is up to. And so he meets the people he's writing to where they're at. He starts by saying, in the beginning, the Word. And in that small group of words, he kind of grabs the attention of everyone. First of all, he grabs all the Jewish readers within the beginning. The start of the scriptures started with that, in the beginning, God. And he kind of sticks it together with something they would have known. In the beginning was the Word. The word translated word there is the Greek word logos. It's where we get our word logic from. There was this kind of idea going around of this thing called the divine logos. This idea that the divine logos had created the world, sustained the world, and was something that they aspired to, that they wanted to attain: logic, reason, understanding, wisdom. And so John starts by going, this thing that you think you know, that's bigger than you ever expected. That's bigger. It is God. It was with God. It is God. He is God. And then he expands and stretches their vision. And then he says, in him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. He says, this is bigger than you ever expected, bigger than you ever comprehended. And he's saying, look, this thing you desire, what do you desire? Everything you desire is found in him. He's saying, you know those things that get you, those temptations that are just kind of like faded shadows of the real thing? That's found in God. That's found in Jesus. Those, the things that pull on your heartstring when you're watching films or reality TV show, when you wish that was you, that's found, the fulfillment of that, the true that is found in him. And he says that life, that word has come to us. The light that gives life to everyone was coming into the world. And it was good news. It's good news that God sent his word to us. Because you know somebody through their word. Kate and I live with Anna and Luke. We share an apartment with them. And every morning, Luke looks really nervous now. Every morning, Luke makes himself an artisan coffee. He grinds his beans, he weighs the water, he has an app that tells him when to pour and when to not. And observing him every morning, I could make some conjectures about whether or not Luke likes coffee. But if I went to ask him, he might actually go, actually, no, I don't like coffee, but Anna really does. And so, as I'm such a wonderful husband, I make it for her every morning. His word would give a fuller picture than his actions alone. At the end of the service, you might get on the monorail outside Lot 10, and you might travel across the city. And at the end of the journey, I could ask you about the people you were traveling with. You could tell me about what they were wearing, what they were reading, if it was busy, how they smelled. You could tell me all things about them. But if I asked you, do you know them, and you hadn't spoken to them, you'd say no. We know someone through their word. That's how persons work. That's how people work. And John is saying, God has given us his word. He's given us a picture. He's given us the full revelation of what he is like in Jesus. Often people will say, what I really need, what I want to believe is a watertight argument. A slam dunk, back of the net, hole in one argument that proves that Christianity is true. But when people want that, they're on the wrong path. Partly because philosophy kind of 101 tells us there are no such arguments for anything that we put our trust in this life, that we build our life upon. Partly because whenever you construct an argument, eventually you're relying on the use of your faculties and you can't prove that they are reliable. This shouldn't surprise us. Even in mathematics, the most kind of pure of rational sciences, there are what's known as primitive notions. Principles that can't be verified or are unprovable, but we have to accept through kind of experience, but we can't know for sure. When people ask for a watertight argument, and even if God had given us a watertight argument, that wouldn't help us because it would just tell us things about God. It wouldn't enable us to know him. Instead of a watertight argument, he's given us a watertight person. He's given us Jesus. People often also say, why doesn't God, it's great for you that you've got faith, but why doesn't God make himself known to me? Why doesn't he just come and reveal himself to me? John says he has. 2,000 years ago in the person of Jesus. He came and he made himself known. And if you will take the time and explore his claims and see his life and explore who he said he was, you will see that his word holds together, that his life holds together, that he is a watertight person. It's not saying that there is no reasons to believe. There are reasons. There are compelling reasons to believe. But what he has given us is a full revelation of who he is in a way that we can know him. He's given us his word. And then the word became flesh. That's the event that we celebrate at Christmas. That God, the creator of everything, entered into creation and became a fertilized egg in a teenage mother's womb, and then grew for 9 months, just grew, doing nothing spectacular except the spectacular thing of growing, as every one of us have done. He entered into creation and was birthed and grew up. The word became flesh. But why? In the 60s, the Russians were the first to get a guy into space, Yuri Gagarin. And when he came back down, the premier of Russia made a statement. He was kind of trying to affirm the atheist state kind of philosophy. And he was saying, we're atheists. And he said, and we now have more proof for our atheism than ever, because we sent a man into the heavens and he did not see God there. Now, C.S. Lewis was still alive at that time, and he kind of responded to this in a little essay called The Seeing Eye. And what he said was, this doesn't really make sense. He was saying, if God existed, you wouldn't relate to him as somebody kind of on the ground floor relates to somebody on the first floor. You know, if you want to know if your upstairs neighbor is in, you just pop upstairs, knock on the door, and if they're in, they let you in, and if they're not, they don't. But he's saying, if God existed, that's not how we would relate to him. The way we would relate to God is as Hamlet relates to Shakespeare, or as any character relates to its author. You know, Hamlet can't find out about Shakespeare by looking around amongst the words of the play. He can't even climb into kind of the rafters of the theatre to find Shakespeare. The only way he can know anything about the author is if the author puts something about himself in the play. You know, as far as the creature digs down into creation, all he ever finds is creation. There is nothing, as far as you go down or as far as you go up, that wasn't created. You never find God. Dorothy L. Sayers was a pretty amazing person. She was one of the first women to ever graduate from Oxford University, and she was made a living as a writer, and her kind of most successful character was a mystery solver, a fictional aristocrat called Lord Peter Wimsey, and he would go around in his spare time solving mysteries. And the thing with her novels, she wrote lots of them, and he kind of aged in real time, but was single in all the stories. And then suddenly, this woman appears in the stories called Harriet Vane. And she appears out of the blue. And we're told that she is rather plain to look at, but that she is one of the first women to have ever graduated from Oxford, and that she makes her living writing mystery writing and crime solving. And Harriet Vane meets Lord Peter Wimsey, and they meet and they solve a mystery together, and they fall in love and live happily ever after. And what people have said is that Dorothy Sayers wrote herself into her story. That she looked down into the world she'd created, she looked at the man she had created, and she loved him, and seeing that he was lonely, wrote herself in and went to be with him. Now that's kind of cute and a bit sweet, but that's what God actually did. The Word became flesh. He wrote himself into the story that we could know him. And John says he made his dwelling amongst us, that he tabernacled amongst us. He could have used any word there, but he picks the word tabernacled. He wants the reader to think back to the story of Israel, that Israel was brought out of slavery towards the promised land, but was in those days of the wilderness. And in those days of trouble, God sent his presence to live amongst them in a tent, in a tabernacle. They were living in tents, and God lived in a tent. I mean, admittedly, his tent was a bit nicer, but it's still a tent. He lived in a tent amongst them. And John's saying this, the Word became flesh, and he lived amongst us. We saw him, we saw his glory, we saw what God was really like, and we could touch him, and you can experience him too. You can find out and understand and meet this God too as you look at this person of Jesus. The Word became flesh, became vulnerable, knowable, touchable, and dwelt among us. He could have stayed far away and just told us about himself, but instead he kind of got down alongside us and participated and did what we did, went through what we go through. That's what happened at Christmas. That's when you see a baby lying in an animal's food bowl. That is what is happening, God making himself known. But what does that mean for us? What does that mean as we go through those days, these days, the days of confusion, days of trouble, days when things don't quite make sense? Well, it means that in those days, you can know that you are loved. It cost Jesus a lot. It cost God a lot to make himself known. He added to his divinity, humanity. He came down and, didn't even come the best of humanity. Not that that had been great. He didn't even go to a palace or that. He came to the last, the least, and the lost. He experienced everything bad that this life has to offer. And then on the cross, it cost him everything that we could know him and be in relationship with him. Because love is trouble. We want love to be kind of unicorns and rainbows and everything happy, but love hurts. Love is, being with the poor. It's eating with the sick. It's being friends with jerks. Like love hurts. Love is a baby in a manger in a stable. And you were worth it. You can know you were loved. You can know that it was worth Jesus going through everything he went through because he loves you. In those days, you are loved. In those days, you can know that you are understood. One of Jesus' names that we sing about at Christmas is that he's the wonderful counselor. The best friends, as are the best therapists or counselors, are the ones who've been through what you're going through and kind of don't just come alongside and tell you how to fix it, but kind of come alongside you and go, I know it hurts, I know it's hard, but you can get through this. They counsel you through this. Jesus has been through everything that you are going through in those days. He has experienced what it is like to be rejected, to be lost, to be the last. He has experienced what it is to have a calling that feels like it's going to crush you. He has experienced everything that you go through, every temptation, every success, every failure, every time, every prayer that seems to go unanswered. He has experienced that. And he understands you. And he hears you. In those days, you are understood. In those days, you can have hope. The whole purpose of creation was that God would come and enter in creation to be in relationship with us. We're told that everything was created for Jesus through him. It was created for him. And the first thing kind of we in charge of creation do is go, no, not having any of that. It's like the whole purpose was one thing and we said no. It's like 100% failure, 100% complete catastrophe. And at that point, God didn't abandon it. He entered into it. He got down into the mud. He got down into the dust. He got down amongst us and didn't abandon it. He redeemed it. When you kind of have those days where you look at yourself, your own character, and you're less than encouraged, should we say, you can know that you have hope because God is faithful to complete the work that he's started in you. When you look at your job or your projects or your family and it feels like it's everything you invested is coming to nothing, you can know that you can have hope because God has not given up. When the worst failure happened, God came in and sorted it. It says that we are made in the image of God, but it's like somebody threw mud all over the painting. And instead of throwing the picture away, the artist called again for the sitter, for the model to come and sit so that we could be painted again in his image. In those days, you have hope. And finally, and most importantly, because it undergirds all the others, in those days, you are graced. This passage is about God, but kind of humanity has two kind of cameo appearances. We have two things that we do in this passage. The first thing is we reject him, and then we receive grace. We reject God and receive grace. That is not a great picture for us, really, in this passage. God comes. He does everything in this passage. We do not go to him. He came to us. He traversed the gap. And then on the cross, he closed the gap so that you and I could be in relationship with him. He does it all. It is all by grace. There is no way to the way. Jesus is the way. We don't make ourselves better. We just are, and he accepts us as we are. Jesus, all other religions are do this, pray this, achieve this, and then you'll be accepted. Jesus says, you are accepted. Now come and follow. This is all in response. The only action that we have in this, the only verb to take away from this passage is that we receive. Constantly we reject God. The word came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. We rejected him. He came to the stable of our hearts with kind of animals rolling around and funny smells. And we reject him. And he comes again. And we reject him. And he offers grace. And he offers grace. And he offers grace. It says out of the fullness, out of the overflow, all there is in Jesus is grace for us. And our only action, our only response is to receive. In those days, you are graced. In those days where it just seems like chaos. In those days where it seems like everything's going wrong. In those days, Caesar wanted citizens to take from. But in those days, God wanted children to give to. And God was at work in those days. You can have confidence in the chaos. When it kind of feels like your life is a pinball in a pinball machine, just being bounced around, you can know that it's in those kind of days that God works so that you can know that you have hope, that you are understood, that you are loved, and that you are graced. Because all who received him, all who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Why don't we stand and pray? And we're just going to do that now. We're just going to receive. God's Holy Spirit is here. The gift that God longs to give us is his presence amongst us. Presence in our heart. He wants to live, to tabernacle in our hearts. And we're just going to receive. The Spirit has been here, and we're just going to take some time just to be still in kind of all the busyness of our week. So just embrace the silence, embrace the stillness. And you might like to hold your hands out. It's nothing kind of magic, but it's just kind of an outward sign of saying, yes, God, I want to receive this gift that you want to give me today. So Holy Spirit, we love you. We love your presence amongst us. We love what you do. We love the way that you do it. And so we ask, Holy Spirit, come now. Come, Holy Spirit.